Joining us now, Angela Cummings. She's the Associate Area Director for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. Very important event coming up this weekend, the Out of the Darkness Walk here in Springfield. That's on Saturday. We'll tell you more about that in a moment. But we want to talk about suicide prevention in general. Angela, thank you so much for being here with us. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. It is always my pleasure to come and talk about this topic
Well,
and talk to you specifically. So
it is such an important issue. I've been touched by it with both family members and friends, and it is something that is it's so prevalent, but also still so difficult to talk about. And I know that there's been a lot of concerns that, especially during the pandemic, it's increased people's feelings of isolation, of loneliness. What has that meant in terms of fears about suicide and about the number of people who are contemplating or acting upon those ideas?
So that's a really good question, and it's kind of a complicated answer. So definitely those things that you mentioned, feelings of anxiety, reporting feelings of depression, a whole host of mental health issues that people had not realized or even had experienced before did sort of bubble up during that pandemic. And all of those things that you mentioned are considered risk factors for suicide. None of those mean that on their own that they're going to lead somebody to have suicidal ideation or even make an attempt, but they are definitely what we call risk factors. That means that it could increase someone's likelihood that they might make an attempt or have a feeling of trying to kill themselves. So what it has meant so far is that the data has not shown a huge increase at this time in the rate of suicide. That's the good news. We are getting some reports, though, of increased attempts, and certainly among certain demographic populations. So that is why we really want to be on top of this. That's why talking about this, on the show right now and coming out to the walk and really being proactive and meeting people where they are in terms of the increased stress around, the pandemic, and even coming out of the pandemic has its own set of stressors. So that's why it's just really important to be on top of this, to continue talking about it. Sure, the data did show a slight decrease in the suicide rate last year. That's great, but that's just one side of the story. That's not the complete picture, and it's not for all demographics, actually. So it's a more complex picture than just that one number, for sure.
Because you mentioned demographics, are there certain groups that are maybe more likely to act on these sorts of impulses? Is it teens, young adults, older people? Is it tied into income status, things like that? Are there factors that might make it a more prevalent issue?
Certainly the rates differ slightly by demographics. And I will say that actually it varies greatly by one demographic, and that unfortunately are people of color, our BIPOC communities, Black, Indigenous, Latinx. Those rates, unfortunately, and particularly in Black communities, have actually skyrocketed, where other rates have gone down. In terms of attempts and actually people who complete suicide, unfortunately, middle-aged men still tend to rate the highest in terms of the numbers of suicides and the numbers of suicide attempts. That tends to be because men tend to use, and this is the other demographic, tend to use firearms. And more than 50% of our suicides are utilized with a firearm. So again, we have a strong stance on gun safety. We are not getting into the discussion about gun rights or gun control. We just have a really big interest in gun safety because we know that if we can keep people who have access to firearms safe, then those suicide rates will come down for sure.
Are there always warning signs ahead of a suicide attempt or a suicide? In my experience, and while it wasn't someone who was necessarily close, like I'm seeing them on a day-to-day basis, people I felt like I knew, and when they took their own lives, it came as a real shock to a lot of people. Are there always red flags that you can or should spot, or does it happen without warning at times?
Well, people can be, that's also a complex question. People can be really, really good at masking the pain that they're feeling inside. And in that situation, they may not give you some of those typical warning signs, but if you are close to someone, close enough to really notice some of the more nuanced changes, there definitely are some warning signs that you might pick up on. Talk, mood, and behavior. So let's start with behavior here. They may be behaving in very strange ways. They may seem sad or depressed. On the other side, they may seem really high, elevated, talking a lot, not themselves, very hyper, kind of running around, joining a bunch of things, quitting a bunch of things, just really atypical behaviors of any description would be a warning sign. Mood, again, that's that just, not feeling down in the dumps, not being themselves, not taking pleasure in things that they would typically take pleasure in. Those are the kind of, mood signs that you might look for and that you might recognize if you were really close to someone. And then the last one, which seems so obvious but is often overlooked, is talk. People who make an attempt on their life will oftentimes flat out talk about it. I mean, people may laugh it off. They may present it as a joke. They may present it as a flippant comment. And then when you sort of come back on it, they say, no, I'm feeling down. But what we have learned is that people who are suicidal and who do end up making an attempt, and unfortunately who may go on to die by suicide, they will often say something. And again, it can be kind of disguised and missed or laughed off. But as you say, I don't want anyone to ever feel, and this is something that does happen with suicide loss survivors, what did I miss? You sometimes, again, people can be so good at hiding behind, the smile or the face that they put on a daily basis that you may not pick up on some of these more nuanced signs. But being educated about it and kind of knowing what to look for can't hurt. You may pick up on that slight difference. Maybe they're saying, I just couldn't get out of bed this morning. It's like, well, if they keep saying that, and I notice they're not eating, and they're no longer coming to bowling league, well, then you kind of start to see a pattern, and then you might feel like something is going on that you might want to mention to your friend, coworker, acquaintance.
We're talking with Angela Cummings, American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, ahead of the Out of the Darkness walk this weekend. Again, more details on that in just a moment. But Angela, when somebody does say it that overtly and suggest they could hurt themselves, people often don't know exactly how to react or what to do. What should the next step be? How do you intervene in a way that would hopefully save that person's life?
Absolutely. People feel very uncomfortable about that. They feel uncomfortable about breaching the subject even with someone because it's like, well, they're going to be mad at me if I ask them this. And what we have found is that people really need to be asked directly. So if they say something flippant or something even not so flippant, you actually need to say, I really care about you. And I just want to make sure, are you thinking about killing yourself? I mean, you can be as direct as that. Are you thinking about taking your own life? It seems so scary to say those words. And people often worry that the person they're speaking with will just get mad at them, and say, why would you even think that about me? How ridiculous. You would rather, speaking from experience, and probably many of your listeners have this experience, I'd rather have someone mad at me than not around anymore. And honestly, if they get mad at you for asking that question, at least they know that you care and then that connection exists. And that if they should ever get to feeling that badly, you're a person that they can count on and go to. Definitely. So if you do ask that question, if you get to that point with someone where you really feel like you need to intervene, you have asked that very direct question. Are you thinking of killing yourself? Are you thinking of taking your own life? And they say, well, actually, it has crossed my mind. The best thing you can do with someone at that point, the best thing you can give them is time. Do not leave them alone if it's at all possible. Stay with them. Try to guide them to help. That means calling the suicide prevention hotline, possibly making some calls to see if they can get into a behavioral health center, or calling even their primary care physician if they don't have anyone else they can call, taking them to the emergency room if it's really that critical and they feel like it is imminent that they may make an attempt, or that is so prevalent in their mind that they're looking for a method, for example. That time component is so important. We have some data that indicates that people who make an attempt on their life often contemplate it for less than 10 minutes. So they're in a lot of pain. Maybe they've been in a lot of pain for a really long time, but that decision to actually act on it often happens in less than 10 minutes. So if you know someone is in a crisis moment, just staying with them, just keeping them safe. If you're on the phone with them, staying on the phone. I've had to call the lifeline for someone before, and I've had the lifeline on one side, and I've had the person in crisis on the other. I don't hang up on one to call the other. Again, we have a board member who needed to call 911 for someone who was in very severe crisis and afraid for their own life. She stayed on the phone with that person until 911 arrived. Staying with that person, trying to ensure that they're safe, guiding them to some kind of help is the best course of action at that time.
And that brings us to the Out of the Darkness Walk to encourage these conversations and communication, helping people understand this issue so you know how to intervene and help. So, Angela, give us the details, if you would, about the walk coming up on Saturday at Southwind Park.
Sure. The walk is you can come by starting at 1 p.m. and register if you aren't already registered. We're going to start walking around 2 o'clock. The Out of the Darkness Walk started over 30 years ago, and they were started by suicide loss survivors specifically. And they were really mostly focused on research, and they wanted to bring more awareness to the issue of suicide and suicide prevention, and research that might be done to save lives. And it has morphed over the years into like a really big tent now. So if you come out on Saturday, you will definitely see suicide loss survivors, families and friends of people who have been lost to suicide. You will also see people who are in the midst of their own journey. They receive mental health help. Maybe they've made an attempt, but they're in the middle of that journey, and they want to come together with people who understand that there is nothing wrong with talking about your mental health and asking for help. So they're definitely going to be out there. And then we have a pretty large contingent of educators, teachers, and mental health professionals who, this has touched them a lot too. And they want to just be sure that out of the darkness metaphor, we're just bringing the subject out of the darkness. The more people can talk about it, the less stigma is associated with talking about mental health and suicide, then the more lives we're going to save. And it really has morphed into just a really nice community event. Just supportive people everywhere you look, everyone willing to give a hug if you need it. So it's just a really nice event. There is no registration fee. We do not charge any registration fee for our Out of the Darkness walks, but you're always welcome to make a donation. And of course, we welcome those. So everyone is welcome to come out. 1 p.m. Southwind Park, and probably be done in a couple hours. So not like a big chunk of your day, but again, a really nice event and a chance to pick up some resources and meet other people.
And a very important message to get that word out, to not be silent, to reach out and provide that assistance and help. If people would like to learn more in advance, where can they go to do so?
So you can just go to afsp.org/Springfield IL.
AFSP for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. Angela Cummings is the Associate Area Director. And Angela, thank you so much for joining us here. We really do appreciate it here on WMAY on 92.7, 94.7, and 970 AM.